Asterisk, can I eat what you didn't finish? Homeless girl asks the single dad. And she changes everything. The little girl stood beside the trash can, shivering in the cold evening wind, her eyes fixed on the half-eaten sandwich in the single father's hand. Her cheeks were dirty, her clothes were torn, and her voice trembled as she looked up at him and asked the question that would change both of their lives forever. Can I eat what you didn't finish? The man froze. His 6-year-old son stopped chewing his fries and stared at the girl. For a long moment, the busy restaurant around them disappeared. There was only a hungry child standing in front of him, and a question so heartbreaking that it pierced straight through his soul. Before we continue this emotional story, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of one small act to change a life, please like this video, comment below, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to *Saltales Storic for more heart-touching stories. Daniel Harper knew what it meant to lose everything. 3 years earlier, he had been living a comfortable life with his wife and young son. Then tragedy struck. His wife, Emily, passed away after a sudden illness, leaving him alone with little Ethan. The medical bills had drained their savings, and grief had drained his spirit. Since then, every day had been a battle. Daniel worked long hours as a mechanic, barely earning enough to pay rent and keep food on the table. He often skipped meals so Ethan could have a better one. Some nights he cried after putting his son to bed, wondering if he was failing as a father. That evening, after receiving a small bonus at work, he decided to treat Ethan to hamburgers and fries at a small diner. It was the first time in months they had eaten somewhere other than home, and then the little girl appeared. She looked no older than 8. Her brown hair was tangled, and she hugged herself tightly as if trying to stay warm. There was fear in her eyes, but there was also hunger. Deep, painful hunger. Daniel looked at the half sandwich in his hand and then at her thin face. Instead of giving her the leftovers, he bought her a fresh meal. The girl's eyes widened as if she couldn't believe it. She sat at the corner table and ate slowly at first, almost carefully, as though afraid someone would take the food away. Then she began eating faster, tears rolling down her cheeks. Ethan watched silently. When the girl finished, she carefully folded the napkin and slipped the remaining fries into her pocket. Daniel gently asked why she wasn't eating them. She lowered her eyes and admitted she wanted to save them for her grandmother. Her grandmother. Daniel's heart tightened. The little girl explained that her name was Lily. She and her grandmother had been living in an old abandoned storage shed after being evicted from their apartment. Her grandmother was sick and couldn't work anymore. They hadn't eaten properly in 2 days. For a long moment, Daniel couldn't speak. He looked at Ethan, who was already staring at him with those innocent eyes children have. Then Ethan did something unexpected. He took his untouched cookie and placed it in Lily's hand. The little girl looked as if someone had handed her treasure. That simple gesture broke something inside Daniel. He remembered his wife always saying that kindness costs nothing but can mean everything. Without fully understanding why, he asked Lily to take him to her grandmother. The storage shed was on the edge of town. It was cold, damp, and barely fit for animals, let alone people. Inside, an elderly woman lay under a pile of old blankets, coughing weakly. When she saw strangers enter, she immediately tried to sit up, apologizing for the terrible conditions. Daniel learned that her name was Margaret. She had raised Lily alone after her daughter passed away. Then she became ill and lost her job, and eventually they lost their home. Listening to her story felt like looking into a mirror. Loss, grief, fear. He understood every emotion. That night he did something he never imagined. He invited them to stay in his small apartment. Margaret refused at first, embarrassed and ashamed, but Daniel insisted. The next morning, Lily woke up in a warm bed for the first time in months. She couldn't stop smiling. Slowly, life inside the tiny apartment changed. Lily and Ethan became inseparable. They built pillow forts, drew pictures together, and laughed constantly. Their laughter filled the empty spaces that grief had left inside Daniel's heart. Margaret cooked simple meals whenever she felt strong enough. For the first time since his wife's death, Daniel no longer came home to silence. One evening, he found Lily sitting in front of Emily's photograph. She quietly asked if Ethan's mommy lived in heaven. Daniel nodded. The little girl looked at the picture and whispered that maybe she had sent him to find them. Daniel had to turn away because tears filled his eyes. Weeks turned into months. Margaret's health slowly improved. Daniel worked harder than ever, taking extra shifts to support everyone, but strangely, he didn't feel exhausted anymore. Their little apartment was crowded, noisy, and often chaotic, but it felt like home. Then, one afternoon, everything changed again. Daniel returned from work to find social workers waiting at his door. Someone had reported that Lily was living with strangers. There was a possibility she could be placed in foster care. The little girl clung to him, terrified. Ethan cried and begged them not to take his best friend away. Margaret looked devastated. For the second time in his life, Daniel felt helpless. That night, he barely slept. As he watched Lily sleeping on the couch, he realized something surprising. He couldn't imagine life without her. She had entered their lives as a hungry child, asking for leftovers. Now she was family. The next morning, Daniel made a decision. He applied to become Lily's legal guardian. The process was long and difficult. There were background checks, interviews, and mountains of paperwork. Some people questioned whether a struggling single father could raise another child. But Daniel never gave up. Months later, the judge made the final decision. Lily would stay. The little girl burst into tears. Ethan jumped with joy. Margaret covered her face and cried quietly. Daniel simply closed his eyes and thanked God, because somehow, through pain and loss, they had all found each other. Years passed. Margaret eventually passed away peacefully, surrounded by the family she loved. Lily grew into a bright, kind young woman who never forgot where she came from. On her 18th birthday, she surprised Daniel and Ethan. She had received a scholarship to study social work. Her dream was simple. She wanted to help homeless children. That evening, she handed Daniel a framed photograph. It showed the diner where they had first met. Below the picture were the words, "Thank you for buying me a meal instead of giving me leftovers. You didn't just feed me that night, you gave me a family." Daniel couldn't hold back his tears. He realized something beautiful. The greatest blessings often arrive disguised as interruptions. A hungry child had walked into his life and healed wounds he thought would never mend. Before we reach the end of this story, tell us in the comments. If you had been in Daniel's place, what would you have done? And if this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to Soul Tales. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a little hope today, because sometimes all it takes to change a life is a single act of compassion, and sometimes the person you save ends up saving you too.